good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. I guess there's so many things to be considered labour-wise. I mean, the President did mention certain sectors that cannot stop working for obvious reasons, like the security cluster of employment, the health cluster of employment. But broadly, what will be the key considerations to be taken into account at this stage as we head towards the lockdown starting midnight Thursday?
Good morning, Dan. Well, I think aside from the fact that businesses need to understand how they're going to secure a steady income stream, the whole question of how they deal with the payment of their staff becomes critical. Now, unfortunately, the options available to employers are minimal. The obvious ones would be, for example, for staff to utilize whatever annual leave that they have. Another option would be for employers to grant employees annual leave in advance. Another one would be for partial payment. But to be honest, when it comes to SMMEs in particular, what's most likely to occur is that staff won't be paid, and they'll then be required to claim the benefits associated with the Unemployment Insurance Fund, which does make provision for circumstances like this.
Now, is there a case to be made here, Tony? I'm thinking aloud because people are calling, for instance, on the banks, like we've seen in the United States, to provide repayment holidays. Is there a case to be made with employers at the labour relations level to say, can't companies in South Africa, in terms of the lockdown, declare special leave for employees?
Well, Dan, we're seeing that in other jurisdictions around the globe where legislation is being enacted that does enable employers to avoid having to retrench or lay off staff because government has made provision, as you've just mentioned, for example, for additional paid statutory leave. I think the problem we have is because our fiscus and our treasury is already so stretched that making those kinds of undertakings is extremely difficult.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about a need for a special leave, because your annual leave you used to take time out, to rest, to relax, to go on holiday, and that's why you got leave. So you de-stress and you recharge, you get re-energized accordingly, and you come back to work. But so you can't really take annual leave for this specific. I mean, we're in extraordinary times across the globe.
Absolutely, and look, it's not ideal, as you rightly said. We're supposed to take leave to relax, to de-stress, to rejuvenate. And that wouldn't be the case in this instance. And I think, Dan, what it is, it's a trade-off between the lesser of two evils, which is worse, taking annual leave for purposes it was never intended to be used for, or to lose income in the short term from a family budget point of view. And these are the dilemmas and decisions that families and employers are faced with.
I guess some employers will have very little choice in the matter, depending on your size and where your income is going to come from, because as the President declared last night during the lockdown, many shops or other businesses must close, unless, of course, you are one of those sectors that's essential.
That's absolutely right again. And you know, the vast majority of employers are SMMEs who simply can't afford, as much as they may want to continue to remunerate their staff, excuse me, normally. So there is going to be undoubtedly, on a very broad scale, a loss of income across many companies. And families are going to have to find innovative ways of working through this period in terms of their budgets.
Yeah, and I mean, domestic workers, they come to mind for me now at this stage as well of our conversation, Tony, because they have to use public transport, and already I've noticed that there's a significant drop of public transport in and around the areas I drive around in Johannesburg, but when you are in public transport, you're exposing yourself as well to the likelihood of catching this virus, so you might not want to go to work. So domestic workers might be facing a tougher situation as well.
Absolutely, they're particularly vulnerable. If they work for an employer, Dan, that has registered them as they should have been for UIF, then they can claim UIF. The problem with that, of course, is that at a practical level, how do you claim UIF when perhaps you don't have access to technology, laptops, the internet, and you can't travel to a local Department of Labour office because you don't have the funds to do so, for example. So those are very, very serious issues, and everybody's encouraging whoever can to be especially considerate of domestic workers.
Yeah, should we expect the government to address this issue in one way or another, Tony? I know you don't know what's in their minds. We've got an economic cluster briefing this morning at 10 o'clock that we are all anticipating, following last night's announcement by the President. We've seen a media advisory saying the economic cluster and the social cluster ministers will be briefing the country today, starting with the economic cluster at 10 this morning, and then 2 o'clock this afternoon, the social cluster, and tomorrow will be the justice cluster. Now, that's just a broad information, but should we expect them to come and say, this is how we want to assist those employers who can't really afford to do business, but they've got employees who rely on them for income?
Look, I think that's going to happen. I think the first kind of thing we're going to see from that kind of economic cluster, as far as workplace is concerned, is provision for the poor, the so-called working poor, and the so-called vulnerable employees. And I think they'll start with that because that's really where the bulk of employees are, and they are absolutely the most vulnerable. And I wouldn't be surprised if the packages that are announced to alleviate the economic strain on workers doesn't begin with that echelon of employee.
Okay, Tony, thank you very much as usual for your insights. Stay healthy, and don't forget to wash your hands regularly, Tony, like we all have to do nowadays. We live in a different world. We live in very much uncertain times, unpredictable times, and it's just how it is.